All right, we are recording. So as I was saying, Dan Bentley is joining us today from Tilt, and so I think Dan can explain this better than I can, but Tilt provides a local development experience where you can change source code locally and see an app that's deployed to a cloud native platform that uses container images get updated as you're modifying code. And we've been chatting a little bit about what it would look like because we've always had this sort of idea for a development API in Cloud Native Buildpacks that we never kind of fully fleshed out. It'd be something like hooks for a tool like Scaffold or Tilt or whatever to be able to kind of do what Tilt does, but sort of with more language runtime support in a more integrated way. So I don't know, Dan, if you want to kind of give an intro to what Tilt does and kind
Yeah,
of talk about it to the group.
cool. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. I hope that's within the etiquette of this meeting. And please, yeah, feel free to interrupt me if anything's unclear. So I'm Dan, CEO and a software engineer at Tilt. We're an 8-person startup, and we're making this tool. You can see here it's at tilt.dev. It's all open source. So, oh no, I don't want to change anything. So you can go over here. You can see all of the code that I'm going to show you. We also have a channel in the Slack Kubernetes. And I heard about Paquito Buildpacks and was like, hey, what would it take to get the Tilt experience with Buildpacks, Cloud Native Buildpacks? And so really Tilt's about the time that you're editing in your IDE. So not about CI/CD, but really how you have that local experience. And we believe that, developers are a pernicious kind of lazy and really want things to be as fast as they know they could be, or else they'll go do other things. And so I'm going to show you right now an example of what using Tilt is like on this demo app that was published as part of the Paquito Buildpack samples. So I'm going to go into my editor, and when I run Tilt up, it does something in my terminal, but really the UI we care more about is over here in the web. It's being served off localhost, so Tilt is just running on my machine. And because I started it, it knows about all of the different microservices that make up my app. In this case, there's just one. And so you can see that it's running the command it's running specifically is here. Pack build Paquito demo app ... and then this is a bunch of output that I'm less familiar with because I don't use Pack that often. I'm new to it. Hi, thanks for welcoming me. When I go to the Paquito node, Tilt port forwards, and I can see this page. If I go to greeting, which is another endpoint defined here, I can see that when I go into the server.js file, I can say, hello to working group meeting from your application image. When I hit save, I can then go back and see that Tilt saw the file change and is redoing that build. And so I'm just going to talk for a bit as it redoes the build and tell you that what we think is cool about this is you don't have to know about pack or command line flags, or if you're editing files that might be included in different services, you don't have to know about that. You don't have to know about kubectl apply or docker push. And now when I reload it, hello to working group meeting from your application image. So that's kind of layer one, and I'll just pause for 5 seconds if there's anything that's unclear. And then I'll show you the thing I'm proud of, that's how you use this in a way that's as fast as you're used to. So the Tilt file here is what configures Tilt. And so I actually have 2 versions of a Tilt file, and it's written in Starlark, a subset of Python. So when I save the Tilt file to use live update, which is this feature Tilt offers, it does that initial build, which again is going to call pack. and it's going to do that update, and we'll see that it ends up taking on the order of 10 seconds. Yeah, it took a little longer this time. Now, okay, the node's ready, and I'm back here. But now when I go back to the server.js file and I say hello again to the working group meeting, then Tilt updated it in less than a second, and our new code's live. And so I'm excited that this is an experience that can give you the ability to use Pack in your build packs, but also let you augment that with this live update ability to develop as quickly as you're used to outside of containers, so that people aren't scared of developing in containers and actually test their systems as they're developing more realistically, not waiting for CI to catch something. So that's my demo. Most people then ask, hey, what kind of sorcery is this? Are you a witch? Do you weigh more than a duck? Et cetera, et cetera. And so I'll kind of dig in to um, the first tilt file that I showed you looks like this. You just point it at the Kubernetes YAML. You say, hey, to build the image Bakito demo app, there's a command that you run, and whenever a file changes in this directory, rebuild it, and then I want to port forward. So you don't need a load balancer. You don't need to worry about exposing something to the internet accidentally. And that got you that first demo I showed you. But then the key for live update, and there's some other stuff that's a little distracting. The key to live update is here. Essentially, what you want to say is, when I change a file in app-source, I want to sync it into /workspace in the running container. You can also say, hey, if I change package.json, all bets are off. I want you to fall back to that initial image build using pack. And after you move the file in, because it's using npm instead of nodemon, I need to restart. And so we changed the entry point to actually wrap the binary lifecycle launcher in this tool that will restart it when a file's touched. And so we touch that file after copying the code in. And so this kind of strategy we've seen work with all different languages, whether compiled or interpreted. So yeah, that's kind of my demo, my explanation. I can dig into other things. I can shut up and take my seat. What would be useful in this forum?
I think one of the most interesting things to me that we talked about a little bit before was using Tilt to develop, like a larger microservice cluster where you have multiple apps locally maybe, and they're talking to each other in the cloud. Can you talk a little bit about how Tilt enables that? Because I think that was a lot of the value.
Yeah. So we think that with distributed systems, we've kind of seen the ops tail wagging the dev dog, in that it's so easy to have multiple services that you end up it's so easy to operate multiple services because of tools like CI/CD, like observability, that you have more. But that breaks our standard Unix paradigm of like, there's one binary that has one standard out and standard air. And so the existing tools for dev don't work that well. Tilt's a tool that has a workflow engine to be able to start and update multiple services, and a UI so that you can dig in across multiple. Lots of people will just kind of run all of the services in parallel, and just take all of their standard outs and standard errors and throw them into one stream, and it's really easy to miss errors there. And so what we're excited about is that when you have Tilt, it keeps these alerts that's able to show you what the problems are that yeah, I don't even know what that is, but it's good to know. Yeah, you can see here that okay, yeah, it like tried to copy the code in. So there are these, yeah, you're able to see what happens. And so even if you have 15 different services, when there's a problem in one, you can't miss it. Tilt gives you that peripheral vision uh, at the speed of local development. So that's what we're enabling, and it's cool to think that um, we were able to uh, use Tilt's extensibility. So, you know, you can go in and kind of, if you go to the tutorial, it tells you about how to do a Docker build, which just uses a Docker file. But we can also use other builders because we know lots of people aren't satisfied with Docker as a builder. And so we were able to just slot it in without, what I'm showing you now has no changes to tilt the binary. It's just all in that tilt file configuration. So yeah, we think that if you're using Cloud Native Buildpacks and you have more than one binary and you don't want people to have to go to any kind of boot camp, they just should be able to get going when they start. We're saying you can just tilt up and be writing code that day. So that's what we're trying to enable for development. We're kind of more like an IDE. So your CI and CD, we don't know how to help you improve that much because there are lots of people who have thought about that. We're in the inner loop experience.
That looks great. I was going to ask, I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully you can. I've never joined on my phone before.
Sound great.
What does your occasional workflow look like? I was just looking at the docs for like installing a new package. How does that fit in with this? Does that still work in your cloud native example you've got there? Or
Installing a new package.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to.
That's fine. That's fine. So I guess you have the idea of occasional workflows and you define those in your tilt file. Is that sort of, yeah.
Sorry. So, yes, we want the tilt file, we want the tilt UI to almost be a menu of the workflows. And so in addition to having the resources that are about like keeping a Kubernetes service up to date, you can also have what's called a local resource that will just run a command that might be reseed this database or delete the database and start over. And so you can have different of those in there. If you're just adding a package to like if you're talking about installing a package by like adding it to package.json, then there are a few different ways, but people definitely use tilt. And it's kind of up to your team to pick which model you want of, do you want it to just be installed in the container, or do you want it to also be installed in your Git client and you check it in, or maybe you check
Right.
in at least
Okay.
the lock file.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
In the example you showed, if you added a package to package.json, it would have that fallback online. And so it would automatically do a rebuild and install the package. And it would just take longer before you got the feedback that yes, the package was installed in the app and you could see it running.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. Great.
I have a whole bunch of questions, but I want to give other people a chance to kind of dig into.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing here is that we've seen lots of orgs that move to some version of Kubernetes or microservices, find that their dev story is either, we can only edit one service at a time, or we can, we just lose kind of the scope that you would have had with a monolith, but we get advantages iteration is faster. And so Tilt's really about, now you can just develop, you can have full stack live reload for any part of your app. So if you have those pains, or if you've heard people complaining about those pains, you should tell them about Tilt, or tell them to talk to me. I'm Dan at tilt.dev. If you're a spammer, you can already figure it out. If not, that's who I am. I'm on Twitter and say dumb puns. And yeah, we're in the Slack channel in Kubernetes, the Tilt channel. So.
Yeah, so I have some questions around the live updates.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm sort of wondering how context aware do those scripts need to be around how the build pack has actually built your application?
Yeah, right now, a fair bit. I can show you in the tilt file here, which also is live. I forked and have a branch, which I should probably push to master on my fork, that has, I don't know, I can figure out where to put that at some point, so you can look for yourself. So what we had to do here was, in addition to doing the pack build, we needed to add this other binary ENTR. That's what does the restarting. And so that adds this boilerplate, and change the entry point to be this. And we had to know for this file, where do I, in my local hard drive, where do I want it to live in the file system of the running container. And so this came up when I chatted with Stephen and Emily and Ben before, and I sent an email just to them because I didn't know y'all yet, of ways I think it would be awesome. Right, like what I'd love is that instead of having to write this yourself, you Tilt can kind of just ask what I think is called the platform for this kind of information, and know what steps it needs to do, instead of having developers have to hard code this, which I think is a good experience minute by minute, but like a bad experience trying to maintain it month by month. Am I answering the right question? Did I understand it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I guess I was going to say, as a follow-on, you've touched on that there in terms of what the Cloud Native Buildpacks, what pack and the Buildpacks itself, one of the things that they could do to help this along, I guess following along from that is like, how quick would we need to be to avoid wanting to do this kind of live update process and do a full build each time?
Yeah, so I think that if you have more than 1 to 2 seconds of overhead over whatever the non-containerized experience is, that's when developers are going to find shortcuts. And that 1 to 2 seconds includes both running pack, pushing it, rescheduling, pulling. And so one of the advantages of Tilt is Tilt's live update, which I think is generalizable, is that it saves you from having to just reschedule or re-pull, and that's a lot of overhead. I think enough that it might eat up, it might blow out the budget, just even if it were literally a sending one byte somewhere.
I think that the build pack could provide, like, the build packs provide this contractual way of building the image, but I think a build pack could provide a contractual way to do the live update safely, right? Mark what files are okay in a Node app to, do live update. And instead of helping by trying to be more incremental and, optimize, like make sure that every little source code change gets transferred in some very minimal way to the application, and then still have to deal with the container restart. I think a place we can provide a lot of value here is having the build pack express all the language specific stuff to end up with the correct workflow, right? Where it doesn't run into problems. I'm really interested in, I see two types of changes here. One is like you change local source code, there's no local processing, and it gets uploaded right into the container, right? And another one is you change local source code that needs more processing, and so you do a full rebuild locally, and it gets uploaded to the container. A lot of the fast development workflows, especially in enterprise, that people are interested in are rebuilding a jar, like rebuilding Java class files locally when Java files change, and doing hot swapping into the JVM. There are a few tools like Spring Boot Dev tools that kind of have that local processing and then patching into the container workflow. And so I wonder, sorry, go ahead.
If you go and you can see that in a bunch of our example projects, in our examples that are language specific, you can see that we start having like this idea of local resource, which is how you're able to do something on the local machine. And so here we have like we actually compile outside the image build and then just put the resulting binary into the image. And kind of, I think depending on your language, like constraints about like binary size, network bandwidth, Tilt can work with a Kubernetes cluster that's running either, on your laptop, like Minikube or Docker for desktop, or in the cloud, like kind of depending on the constraints. I think there are a bunch of different ways that you might want to do this. And so here's how, this is kind of how Live Update can have some stuff that runs, but like kind of before, like on the local, then you just sync some things up and you can compose what you want. And so I think I was saying, and this will be one of the last things I say before I go, kind of my understanding of the platform interface is that like the things that you want to do here of watching files and knowing where the running container is and how to connect to it are kind of so different from the core of the platform interface that I think there's almost like a new layer that's the piece that's just doing the, I called it DevOrc, the development orchestration, that's able to interact with the platform to know what the steps are, pulled from the build packs so they can be regularized and then used by Tilt, by other tools if you like standards and dislike using the best thing, which, hey, that's your choice. Like, yeah, I'm excited for that world.
Yeah, I think sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One thing I was thinking that I haven't thought through all the way yet, but if when you reran a build, and this is talking about the latter case that Stephen mentioned in the two types of live updates, when build packs have to do something and you still want to sync a running container afterwards, if there could be basically an updater rather than an exporter that could almost fit the same model, and you would just like copy in specific layers that changed and like have some sort of like reload strategy, like what you could specify somehow in the metadata what kind of restart you would need to run if that layer was to change.
Yeah, Stephen, if you could help me get the text of that email I sent somewhere where like that's available to this group and also to me, that would be good, because I do have to run, and I hope I didn't take up too much of y'all's time. And I hope to, continue the conversation. I think I'm planning on coming to the working group meeting tomorrow. So yeah, I'd love to continue this conversation, but I'm afraid I do have to run right now.
I think everybody's very interested in this, and we would be happy to spend more time on it. I'm going to be out tomorrow, but I'll make sure the email thread gets put in the Google Doc, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great.
All right.
Thanks,
Great having you.
Yeah, crap. I quit the wrong application. All right. Bye for real.
So any other thoughts on Tilt and the local development experience to chat about this time?
have lots of thoughts on local dev experience, and Tilt does do a lot of this. I think it brings up a lot of the challenges with cloud native build packs, having to restart the launcher, fast updates. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where build packs are going to be fast enough to run all the time. So I think having a strategy for allowing build packs or a bin develop, as it used to be called, to kind of export information about what type of file changes can be a fast reload and what does that look like, would be important.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key. Also, like being able to support local processing first and figuring out if that needs to happen in a container, like if we need to run a persistent container locally that continuously rebuilds local things or something, or if we can just redo a pack build and come up with a patcher updater that just uploads the layer contents into a remote running container, right? There's just like a bunch of open questions.
Does Tilt, like in the Node.js case, like I guess a lot of languages have lock files, except maybe Python without poetry or something. But if you like make a change in your package JSON and you do the full like fallback on build according to that Tilt file, does that lock file get rsync back to you?
So I think Tilt, with a live update workflow, Tilt never runs any processing in the remote container. So if you change your local package JSON, it does a local pack build, right? And then syncs the and then just re-pushes the image, if that makes sense. So there's no concept of like syncing something in the other direction, is my understanding.
So there's no way to get, like, even if you do a local pack build, pack still does in a container that's not volume mounted, right? So like you're never going to have your lock file updated.
That's right.
Yeah, is it running the pack build? It's running that in the Kubernetes cluster, right? Or is that running it locally first and then syncing the layers?
I think it's local.
In his example, it's local. He's just doing pack build.
It'd be really interesting to just get a container, like I think you were hinting at, Stephen. It's just there all the time with the fully warm cache. It resyncs and kicks off the build again.
Yeah, we've been messing with this a little bit here, and what we've kind of landed on right now is running the builder as the container, using volume mounts to persist the state, not even running export, and having the local development experience just be purely like Docker volumes at this point, right? And then rerunning the builder and detector on certain file changes, or doing like an rsync from like a bind mounted volume, similar to the way Tilt's doing it, to the workspace to allow for live update changes. But there's so much context, which you were talking about earlier, that you kind of have to know, if you have a build pack that's turning a bunch of Java files into a jar, that's not ever safe for patching like live, without the build pack doing something different.
Do you want to demo your stuff, Jesse?
Maybe tomorrow. I mean, I don't know. I don't have Zoom. It's a huge pain to do it because we can't install Zoom on these computers. So I'm on my phone. So I'm not ready to demo right now, but I can demo it tomorrow. I guess I could figure out how to make that work again.
Is that when none of you have video also?
Yeah, I don't have video because you'd just be staring at my ceiling. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm really excited about, figuring out how we can expose the right hooks so that runtimes like Pacato or Heroku Buildpacks can express things like what files change in these different cases, and then not having to implement the thing like Tilt ourselves, if that makes sense. Being able to rely on speccing that and then relying on tools that the community builds to handle all those update workflows, because it seems like there's just immediately a lot of value you can get without us making changes. Imagine what it looks like if that Tilt file configuration is provided in an even safer, even more robust, faster way coming from the runtime, right? Or coming from the Buildpacks definition of how to make the changes. I could really see a very simple, very powerful user workflow with not very much work come out of that if we can define what those contracts are.
Yeah, I feel similar with the whole VS Code, SSH, and remote containers. It's kind of the same story where like they've got all this legwork on being able to attach to containers or spin up containers defined with either Compose or Docker files. And if we could get into that ecosystem with minimal work by either building a dev image or a dev container definition or something, then that would that would be a great path forward to give us all sorts of community support, I think.
I mean, so like from what I could tell, it sounded like basically all they needed to know is like what files, if there were a change in what files, what would cause a cache bust, basically. So could we, like as a build pack, just inject those into something like the bill of materials in like a field or something like that, just on the image initially when you do the initial build, and then you have the bill of materials for all of the files that would, if there was a change, cause a bust?
I don't think you'd use the bill of materials, which is like just like the dependency metadata list. But I think the idea is exactly like I proposed. I'm about to post a link to a doc I'm copying from an email thread I had with Dan earlier. That basically proposes that it's like build packs should be able to output a list of files and associate a command with them, right? And when these files change, this command gets run in the container in order to sync the container with those updates without the container having to go down, right? And then maybe there are two lists of files. There's one that's like here's some source code, and there's another that's like here are things that if they change, a local rebuild process has to happen before an artifact that matches, that gets generated. And I think there are a bunch of options around that too. But I think that's absolutely the right idea. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were wrapping it. One of the things that Terrence was hinting at when he was asking about the package lock that is still a problem that I think, I don't know, like arbitrary execution needs to happen inside a container, like doing an npm install of a package. If you're not, unless we expect users to be running npm externally before they run pack, like you sort of really want to run those inside the container and make sure that those changes from the package log JSON are reflected in the user's work, host file changes as well. Because you can't just edit the npm file by itself. If you're committing a package lock, you've got to have the result of that. But I don't know whether we really want to, I don't know whether Buildpack should be able to export tasks to be able to execute things like that, like pack develop, npm install, then you'd be able to, give that to the Buildpack sort of via its own launcher mechanism and have it install packages and then be able to define the file outputs that can come back to the host container if it was mounted.
So like, if there's no way to make sure your package lock, the solution to keeping your package lock JSON up to date can't just be, hey, before you git commit, run npm install, I guess.
Yeah, because then you have to pay for it twice, right? You have to pay for it locally with a potentially different version.
Yeah.
Like if you do it from Windows but you're running Linux containers, this could be, you have to ignore what's generated on the client anyway. Like you can't bring in node modules because it could be different. And so you need to run that in the container. And so now you've paid for the install twice, basically.
I'm not convinced that somehow doing the npm install in a container locally and then syncing back the changes to the host is the best way versus just running a command on the host. That's the solution that the Tilt people had there, or that the Dan had there, right? Well,
yeah. It just feels real like it's like one of the real problems with Docker dev in general is just like this idiosyncrasy between like what is local and what is in the container that I feel like unless you can solve that problem, like requiring me to actually set up an entire node local dev workflow, like what am I getting doing the thing inside a pack besides maybe, or not even pack, but just like in a Docker container? Like I already had to set up enough to have the dev libraries, like the right version of Node to just like do core functionality development that it kind of like, for sure you get stuff, right? Like I'm being a little like hyperbolic, but like I feel like a big advantage is like if you work in a polyglot company, being able to like pull down something where there is some local Cloud Native Buildpack experience where it's like, I don't need to have the right version of Ruby or Java or whatever, and like being able to just like get up and running.
My resistance to that is mostly that it's like a very specific thing. Host mounts on Mac with Docker for Mac for a really long time were too slow. You couldn't run npm install in a container and have it, correctly update an app that was host mounted between a container and the remote thing due to like how Docker for Mac was set up.
And it's still
I mean, I also think like if we were to,
for what it's worth.
yeah, I also feel like for a local C&B experience, you also wouldn't want to actually do the npm install over a bind volume mount. Like you don't want node modules being written. It's just so many files, right? Like we were just doing the demo that I was asking Jesse to demo, and like it has what, 7 dev dependencies, but it installs 170 packages. Like it's just like a lot of files, right? It's like a ton of IO. Like I still think you'd want that in the container in a layer that could get reused again, right? Like in a Docker volume. But I think the key things are like you want the JavaScript files and package.json and package.json lock, like not requiring me to have to run npm install separately or whatever, right? Like being able to do the things I need in the container, but still have that environment. I think it's kind of the holy grail.
Yeah, and the volume mounts are almost flexible enough to kind of make that, to your point, Stephen, like the Windows node modules thing is also a nightmare. The performance is absolutely atrocious, but you can kind of bind mount, if you bind mount to the host, but then you can create volumes that shadow those basically or overlay them. And then so then the node modules happens only in a Docker. So all the actual writes don't have to come back to the host. And then, so if we make contractual obligations for the build packs to be like, the npm build pack owns the node modules directory, then pack could potentially create volumes for those situations. And, we could get enough information, I think, from the build packs to create the right amount of volumes to make that beneficial.
I worry because their thing is like in the node or in the npm build pack, the Pacato npm build pack, we do an npm install in the app directory and then move it to a layer because for reasons it's hard to directly target a layer when we do that, or at least we used to. I don't know, Forrest, I might be wrong now, but I wonder if a solution that's really technically targeted at solving individual problems, like around the fact that it's hard to keep a local directory synced to their performance problems, if it's going to create too much complexity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, we have some of the same problems. We actually bind mount the node modules to the layer and also to the workspace so that you only install it once. Like there's, like you said, very, very weird technical hacks to kind of make that feel okay.
I wonder how bad is the performance for if you do a host mount for your app directory into a container right now and you do npm install on top and it installs all the node modules into it, you're saying that's really bad on Windows too?
Yeah, on Windows, on the Mac, it's acceptable, I'd say.
I heard it was better on Mac recently.
Yeah, it's much better on Mac now than it used to be. But on Windows, it is unacceptable.
Yeah,
it's still doing Samba shares on Windows. It's real bad, man.
Yeah, it's a real bad time.
Of course.
And this is the default Windows, not the WSL or WSL2 stuff, which they're making some strides there, but that's still squarely in the experimental part.
Oh, so this is with the older subsystem.
Yeah, we were targeting just like whatever you get today by doing Docker for Windows, not what you could get by setting more things up. So I do think that this will be greatly improved with WSL2 whenever they decide to launch that, but that also needs to coincide with Docker for desktop defaulting to that for our case at least.
You can imagine a workflow where if the host mounting really worked and were performant, right? You could have a bin develop that just always assumes that your app directory is host mounted across. And then you could do live updating where if some files change, something like tilt just patches them right in the container. And if other files change, it does a rebuild process before uploading them to the container. And if other files change, it does a full rebuild right from scratch or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like just if we had that capability, I feel like it solves all of the keeping everything in sync in all directions and doing the right things for the right types of changes problem, or letting the build pack express what this right change is.
I think with the build packs that delete the source code.
Yeah, I was going to say there has to be contracts around like the directories, because there's still a lot of build packs that either litter the workspace or like do unmanageable damage to the workspace if you don't know that it's going to happen.
I think that's the benefit of bin develop, though, right? It's like making it a totally separate contract that a build pack has to create. Like bin build is no part of this workflow. You use bin develop to make a development image that ends up in the cluster, and bin develop is what does the rebuilding of whatever. So bin develop could just never delete the source code in a Go case, right? It could always be there. Or it could delete the source code, right? But only in the image that gets generated remotely. And then when it runs locally, it doesn't delete the source code so that when you change it, it can compile the artifacts and patch them into the remote image, right? Or like do the layer patching without a layer upload to the registry. And just, I think there's a lot of easy wins here. I feel like, especially if the host mount
if host mounts were good, that's the.
Yeah, one of the things that we did in our local spike was actually not create images. Like we just were building on top of the builder image, and we would run like detect and build manually in the life cycle, and then have volume mounts for basically the various layers that would copy over the next time we launched the container. So they would be there, and we found that like export was a non-trivial amount of time, like as part of pack build.
Yeah, because then our users aren't exporting in local development to a registry, right? So we really wanted to cut out having to actually craft images that someone could then accidentally push up to a cluster. I'm not against creating an image, but I do think that having a way of just running it without creating an actual image artifact would be preferable.
You're talking about a development workflow where the app is running locally, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So like I am very uninterested, if that makes sense, in being able to do that locally, because so many applications people develop require connecting to a whole bunch of other services that you can't reasonably run on your machine, to a point where I implemented something as part of CF Local a couple of years ago that would make SSH tunnels into a remote app running nothing and just bind all of the services you could possibly talk to and redirect them back so you could run your app locally without running all the other services. And the pain of doing that has really put me off to
well, I mean, you can imagine
the app running locally at all.
You can imagine doing the same thing where you're syncing or whatever for, instead of bind volume mount, like in a container in the cloud, right? Like it's just like you're doing the same work in a container, whether it's local or not, right?
I mean,
you don't have to persist an image and keep it in a registry.
Right.
You could just run on top of the builder, and like keep volumes in PVCs or whatever.
I mean, I think you can do what Tilt's doing and do the build locally and use a host mount as part of the build to keep your local files synced in one workflow, right? You still build the development container, it still runs in the cluster, you still do rebuilds locally, and the host mount is just used to make sure that your local files stay up to date with whatever bin developed does in your app directory. That it only does idempotent things on the app directory and doesn't delete source code, for instance, in that mode. I feel like it's all possible, I guess.
Yeah.
So is building the image a requirement for you then, Stephen? Like a final development image when you run bin develop, or is just having an image that you can run in a remote environment good enough?
Having the app process run in the remote environment, regardless of like maybe you push scratch, right? You're just copying the whole image in there when you start, right? It's not building the image that's important to me. It's just that the app runs in the environment where everything else it needs exists. I feel like is pretty important for a lot of like when people are developing real production apps as opposed to doing demos.
But in most cases, wouldn't they just reproduce that environment or set of clusters in their local environment? Isn't that kind of what the Tilt experience was trying to present?
Tilt there, my understanding of the demo is that they're not running anything, or ideally you're not running things locally, that it's building a final image and then that's running in a cluster, and then your Tilt is taking care of tarring up the changes and transferring them to the cluster, right? Into the container. It wasn't just about a containerized workflow for development. It's about a workflow for development where the apps are running in an environment that looks like what you
Right.
A lot of
it
customers
could be local, and I guess that's the part where maybe it gets a little confusing. Because you talked about the, Docker desktop cluster, Minikube, and all those different clustering mechanisms.
Like when you're thinking about, like from the perspective of how we'd architect this, whether it's Minikube or GK, the workflow doesn't look particularly different, right?
It's important if you can do the host mount or not into the final image that's running the app process. I want to assume that you can't do that you couldn't host mount into the actual app process, and that has to be taken care of by something like Tilt's live update that's transferring files to it. So that you can use the same workflows locally with Minikube or against a cluster. It's just like a lot of the customers I talk to do not, can't run the whole microservice thing, everything they need to talk to locally on their machine. They just don't have enough.
And I think that's fine too. I think, either modifying /workspace directly if that's something that we can obtain to, or even having the code always present in a different location and then, copying to workspace if needed, because I think the same thing's true if you do like a remote container for, VS Code or something like that, right? Like they could, if they can bind mount to the host, they will, but in a lot of situations, like they have flows where you just get clone into a blank container and go from there. And so I'd want to make sure we can target both.
That makes sense. Were you working on an RFC or something?
Not directly, not yet, but I'd like to. I'd like to eventually get there.
If you ever start working on that, I'm super interested in helping out however I can.
Awesome.
Sorry, go ahead.
We were mostly just working on trying to improve local builds for kind of evergreen functions experience. And so hopefully a lot of that stuff will funnel into like an RFC or work that we can share and demo and talk more about.
Sounds awesome. Sorry, I posted an email. There was some conversation between me and Dan just to kind of set up this meeting that had a lot of context. I kind of talked about how I see it, at least in that. I put that in another doc and linked it in the doc there if people want to take a look. And I'll make sure this recording, Dan has access to it, because I think there's probably some interesting discussion here that he'd want to think about. Cool. We're almost at time and we don't have anything else on the agenda. Is there anything else folks would like to chat about?
I have a question about the recordings. Are these being published anywhere? Because I think today's was particularly interesting to reflect back on.
Not currently, but we should probably put them on YouTube, but somebody was going to reach out to CNCF and figure out what the process for doing that is, if it should go on the CNCF account. There are privacy considerations and things. So I wish I had an answer, but I don't have a clear answer.
Not yet. Okay, sounds good.
You could take on, I think Ben maybe was going to reach out to CNCF about it. I forget, but if you wanted to take that on, that'd be really awesome.
I'll see if he's made any progress and then see where it can go from there.
Cool.
So you're not going to be here tomorrow, Stephen?
That's right. I'm on vacation.
Who can hit record then?
Sorry?
Can anybody else record meetings, or is it just you?
I don't know.
That's interesting. I remember Sander was going to set it up so that it auto-recorded, but I don't think that ever happened.
If I make somebody a host now, will they be a host in the meeting if people rejoin?
I don't think so.
Okay. Javier, I made you a co-host in case, so that if it doesn't work, or there's a small chance tomorrow that you might be able to hit the record button. But I think you're right. I don't think it actually persists.
Just make everybody a co-host just in case. Just kidding.
Sure.
Everyone save your worst jokes for tomorrow.
All right. Anything else? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.